let's see. Going live. All right. We are live. Excellent. Well, good evening, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and I'm going to start over, Barbara, because I forgot to I forgot to hit record on the Zoom meeting.
Okay.
Too many parts here.
Yeah.
There we go. Good evening, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and we're here with another of our virtual events. And really excited to have our good friend Thomas Perry here with us, talking about the left-handed twin. Very welcome entry in the Jane Whitefield series. And Tom has graciously signed a bunch of them for us. And so I'll go ahead and put a link in the comments field should you like to purchase one. And also, if you have questions for Tom, please go ahead and put them in chat on YouTube and comments on Facebook. I'll be happy to ask anything. So Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's such a pleasure to see Tom again. And I can remember all the way back to the first Jane Whitefield book when Tom came to see us at the Poison Pen, as he in fact has until COVID stopped him coming for all the books he's written since. It's been wonderful. And this is, I believe, the 9th, isn't it, Tom?
Yes, it is.
And lots of exciting stuff. I have a surprise guest to add to this, a surprise guest who absolutely loved this book. Wait, I'm just going to trade seats with you for a minute, because then you can talk better. There you are. So have a seat.
Hi, Tom.
Hi, surprise guest. How are you doing?
I just read the Left-Handed God. Oh my God, it's the best Jane Whitefield yet. It is so good. I so thoroughly enjoyed it. That stuff. Is it okay if I say Appalachian Trail? I'm not spoiling, right?
No, you're not at all.
Okay, good. Yeah. Because that is just so well written and so true. It's just every word of it. I was mesmerized, enthralled even. God, it was so good. And you ended it on the most perfect note, and I won't spoil that at all, but I can't tell you. I think this is the best one. I think of all the 9 of the Jane Whitefields, honestly, I think you saved the best for last. Yay, you! God, I enjoyed it.
He says it's not the last.
It's not the last? Really?
It's not. I don't know. I think that I did paint myself into a corner, but
You did.
I'm planning to paint my way out.
Well, of course, that's Tom Perry. Yes, of course you are. But oh God, this was a good one. This was just one of the best. Anyway, thank you for that.
Well, what a great commercial. Thank you.
You can quote me, dude.
Actually, Tom, Dana did give me a quote, which I put into our publicity for the book. So thank you, Dana. Dana's going off and have actual dinner while you and I are talking with, but I'm Dana Stabenow, who that was, is a very critical reader. She's tough. So when she really likes the book, it's well worth listening to her, because she doesn't give authors a pass easily at all. But she's been a friend of Tom's. In fact, Tom and I were both honored at the BoucherCon that Dana hosted in Alaska all those years ago. Was it 2011?
I'm not really sure. I was thinking it was 27, but I don't know. Maybe it's 2011. But
I'm not entirely sure either. But I remember what a good time that Tom and I and Diana Gabaldon, who is another. There we all were up in Anchorage, Alaska, and it was wonderful. Yep.
It was.
So Jane, why don't you give us, for people who don't know about Jane, because you haven't written Jane sequentially, because you get interested in other stories and other characters and other books. So Jane has not had an uninterrupted career. And I'll pause just briefly and say that Tom's book, The Old Man, which I thought was wonderful as a standalone. In theory, the movie is actually happening. So we will come back to that. But anyway, Jane, how long ago was it, Tom, when you wrote the first Jane Whitefield?
I think it was, I think I actually wrote it in 1991, but it was published, I believe, in 1992, the Vanishing Act. Well, I got a weird little sort of helper for the publication of that. It was Parade magazine, which is in a whole lot of newspapers every Sunday. Had a little article this week on the 14th, Sunday the 14th, in which they were doing the 101 best mystery books ever. And they, weirdly enough, included Vanishing Act. It was so nice. It was such a nice feeling that they included that in that list. So that's I'm counting on millions of buyers suddenly.
I love it. You mean in 1992? My God, we're coming up on year 30 together then.
About that, yeah. That's
Wow.
right. That's right.
Wow. Okay. So we're still standing, both of us. So that's really good news. But you did, if I remember right, that was a very interesting start, because you had signed a 5-book contract with your publisher
Well,
to write
after-
5
after-
Jane Whitefields. And publishers don't normally do contracts like that. It's really unusual that, you know, somebody would commit to five books in a series. So I thought that was a real testament to the power of your design.
It was kind, and of course, you know, what happened was that I had always said I would never do anything but standalones, because, you know, I wanted to rise to high art. But as soon as I got a good offer, I immediately started writing a series.
You caved.
Immediately, instantly. I like to think that I sold out without negotiation, but you know, my agent at the time did some good negotiating. But it was a pleasure actually to do that. But by the time I was done with it, I wanted to write more standalones, because I kept thinking of ideas I wanted to pursue, and you know, I couldn't do it until I was really done with those 5 books. But then later on, I decided I missed Jane so much, I wanted to write about her again after that was over. So I've been doing it ever since, every little while when I have something I feel as though it's I don't know, worth my time and the reader's time. You know, you really sort of have to wait until there's a reason to write a sequel. You know.
Well, your last book was in fact another book about the butcher's boy.
It
Yeah.
was. It was.
Tom's first novel, The Butcher's Boy, was a sensation. It won the Edgar Award. It, you know, was a huge success. And Eddie's Boy was the one that he wrote last year. And it was interesting to go back and see him, because coincidentally, hadn't it been something like 30 years? Or, I mean, what was the time lapse between The Butcher's Boy and Eddie's Boy?
Well, let's see. The Butcher's Boy was published in '82, and I wrote it in 1980. So, you know, the publication date, you know, was ultimately 1982. So next year, I guess it'll be the 40th anniversary of The Butcher's Boy.
But I mean, I was thinking in Eddie's time, how many years have elapsed between The Butcher's Boy and Eddie's Boy?
Oh, let's see. The first one was Butcher's Boy. The second one was 10 years after that. And then 20 years passed. And I wrote the third one, The Informant. And then the fourth one is, I guess 9 years, something like that. 8 or 9 years since the last one. But,
Right, I'm not asking my question right. How many years in Eddie's life have elapsed between The Butcher's Boy and Eddie's Boy?
Eddie, I'm not sure what date I gave Eddie a chance to die. Actually, I had him die two different ways in the series. Only 2 people noticed it or wrote back about it, you know, and said, "Hey, why did you change that?" You know, so I won't say what. No, it was because I realized that I couldn't let Eddie die without The Butcher's Boy doing more about it than he did in the first book. So I elaborated a little bit more. So.
Well, you did, and then the son. I mean, one of the great things about fiction is you can suspend real time, and so, you know, The Butcher's Boy has gotten older, but not necessarily that older. Jane, despite the 30-year time span here, Jane's not significantly older than she was when we first met her, right?
Well, she's during the first bunch of books, she was aging a year each time. And I would, you know, the next year she would remember what had happened in the previous one, which was a year ago. So she knew a little bit more each time and aged a little bit. but at a certain point, she was aging too fast for me. I just, I had to slow it down and lie about the time.
Yeah, well, I don't know that it's lying about it. I think that readers are really happy, Tom, to, suspend disbelief. And, they don't want their characters to grow old. And certainly if you have a dog in the series, I've had this discussion with a couple of authors, the dog can't get any older, because dogs have such a short lifespan. So I've had a really great discussion with Peter Abrahams, who writes this Spencer Quinn, about the fact that his people age, but the dog seems to be immortal. And there we are. But you talk about the fact that Jane is relatively recently married to her physician husband in this book.
Yeah, well, he's let's see, I think they've probably been married something like 8 years or something like that, but she's very happily married to him, but they do have a couple of issues, and have always had them. That is that, you're this nice, respectable physician was very surprised when he learned what Jane actually was doing during the time since they had graduated from college together. And, everything that she does is illegal. Everything she does is dangerous. And it's getting more and more difficult to get away with as she gets older, and technology improves, and so does sort of national security. So Jane has to get a little sharper as she goes along.
Well, I would say that facial recognition technology is a real challenge for you writing these series. In geo-tracking, by now we've all learned that if you're going to be up to something bad, or if you're trying to hide or escape, you don't want to take your phone with you. You want to, get a burner phone or something, because it's too easy to track you. So one of the great things about reading crime fiction is that even if you're not technologically competent, you're forced to learn a certain basic amount of technology, because the authors had to learn it in order to make the plots work.
Well, yeah, it's actually an incredible technology when you think about it. Being able to actually pick out a phone. I'm sort of addicted to true crime things that I see on television, and I was watching an episode of Body Cam. Do you know what Body Cam is?
No, I know.
It's a series in which what they show you is the body cameras that cops wear as they go out and do things, do arrest people and so on. And in the midst of that, one of the cops in one of the episodes realizes that a killer is on the loose, and he has a guess as to where this person is going to be. And so really in real time, practically, he's able to have the phone traced, because he knows that it's the phone that the person had taken the phone from the woman who was killed. So this guy obviously got it with him, and it was incredibly fast. I never had any idea that it was that quick, that you could actually do it in that kind of speed. So
I don't know that
sticking and trying.
I'm not sure. Obviously you'd have to be in law enforcement to command that kind of speed. If you read British crime, or watch it, because there's a ton of long form television, produced in Britain and other countries, you realize that CCTV is your problem as a crime writer, because they have, in every British police show that I watch, the first thing the police do is call for the camera footage, because as far as I can tell, there might be like 8 feet of England that is not under some sort of camera coverage. But that's not true in the United States, is it?
No, but it's we're getting more and more of it, because people have private security systems with cameras. So it's relatively easy for the police to go around and ask, was your camera working that night or whatever, and eventually they often get some civilian footage that serves the same purpose. But on the British thing, I've always thought, gee, that's really shutting down a lot of possibilities. If not for writing, at least for my plan to retire and become a criminal in England. But I was happy to learn that crime statistics have not gone down at all since CCTV came in. It makes no statistical difference, whatever. I don't know why, but it doesn't seem to be effective in crime fighting. So
That's fascinating. I just assumed that in fact it was.
so
Wow.
did I. So did I. I would, sitting there thinking, gee, it's a miraculous but a little bit creepy development, but it isn't as creepy as I thought.
So for those of you who have formed an attachment to Tom and his writing from the standalones and so forth and don't know Jane, we should really go back to basic Jane, Tom, and tell us, how did you conceive this character and what is it? What's her mission?
Well, Jane is a person who was born in Western New York near the Niagara River, and she is half Seneca Indian. And really, she is extremely sort of traditional and yet an extremely modern woman. She went to Cornell University, where she ran track and studied very hard and met a lot of people that she has run into since. And then went back to the small town, imaginary town called Daganoweda, which is roughly halfway between Niagara Falls and Buffalo on the Niagara River, and has a relationship still with people who are on the Seneca Reservation, which is called the Tonawanda Reservation, which is along Tonawanda Creek, maybe 25, 30 miles east of Buffalo. And she's a traditionalist, as somebody said about her in one of the earlier books. She's as conservative as your great grandma, but she lives in the world that we live in today. In other words, what Jane does that I like a lot is that she sees the landscape of Western New York in all of its different states. In other words, she looks at Route 5 going across the state of New York from essentially the Memorial Auditorium in Buffalo, right almost at the river, all the way across the state, and it follows the exact path of the Waagwaneyu, which was the I don't know, sort of the Seneca Trail that went across to the next group, which was the Cayugas, and then to the Onondagas, and then to the Oneidas, and then to the Mohawks, and so it went all the way across the state. And that was the way they communicated with each other, or one of the ways that they did. They also went back and forth by water. But she looks at that, she sees a modern road, but she also knows what it is, that things happened there. She knows what things happened there. At the same time, she also knows what myth says happened in these different places. So that, like, if you go to Niagara Falls, you see Niagara Falls and you see the city of Niagara Falls, but a Seneca would know that right behind the falls is where a minor deity named Hino the Thunderer lives. That's why it's so loud, because he lives behind the curtain of water. So she's really a lot of fun. I mean, she has the furniture of her mind is different from the things that we grew up with, and so she's a fun character to deal with in that sense. But what she does is that at a certain point in her life in college, she realized that because she had worked a summer job as a skip tracer to trace down debts, she knew essentially how to hide from people who are looking for anyone. And at a certain point, one of the friends of hers in college is accused of something and is about to be convicted, and she realizes, okay, I know how to do this. I know how to get him out. And so she does. But a number of other friends were aware of the fact that she had done it. And so later on in life, at various points, each of them remembers that Jane knows how to do that. And so a couple of them are lawyers, and a couple of them are people who, at some point or other meet somebody who is in desperate trouble, and so that they show up at Jane's door. And she's takes people away from a place where they believe they're going to be murdered, and takes them to other parts of the country where nobody knows them, and she teaches them how to live as new people, which is kind of based really on, in my mind, that is the way I thought of it, was that was very much like what happened when any of the Iroquois nations adopted people. They were at war constantly, and so they were constantly trying to replenish their population, or trying, not necessarily trying to, but let's say they were willing to increase their population, so that there were all sorts of people who had been in different walks of life, or had been, I don't know, they're running away from wars, or they were captured by someone or other. And occasionally the Senecas would allow one of them to become a Seneca. And what they did was they changed your name to be the name of somebody who had been lost. That is, you would not only get the person's name, but the person's entire identity. And you would also assume his relatives and his responsibilities. So essentially, in a way, you would become a replacement for this person who had been lost. And what Jane does is essentially that. She gives a person an entire life. She has ways of getting false identification. She has ways of sort of building identities over periods of years, so that they'll stand up when anybody investigates. Say, who is this person? Well, this person is, had a credit card for 15 years with this company, and we know who he is, and et cetera.
It was really basically her own version of witness protection. I mean, it's a private, not government operation for witness protection. And what I've always loved is that, you invert the sort of, Indian tracker idea we have, about how great their observational and cultural skills, had prepared them to track people, and you reverse it and make Jane disappear people rather than track them down. And to do that over the course of the books, there have been some pretty wide-ranging landscapes that, some of your books have covered a large geographical area, as Jane has done it. But it seems to me, I'm trying to remember which book it was. Was it 2 or 3 books ago? You and I had a wonderful discussion, because you'd kind of done what you knew about the Senecas, but a real Seneca came along and offered to consult with you so that you would get all the Seneca Indian stuff right. And so Jane's been closer to home since then, hasn't she?
Well, the person that you're talking about is a Seneca attorney named Paul Williams, who that's his English name, but he has another name. But he is a person who has spent an entire career looking out after essentially Native American rights. He's Canadian, and he lives on the Brantford, I guess they call it a reserve. That's in Canada. And as far as I know, he's still working, even though he's done quite a few things over the years. He was one of the people who essentially negotiated for the Mohawks in the Oka crisis many years ago, it was about 20 years ago or so, in which what had happened was that there was a whole bunch of land that had been placed in trust for the Mohawks with the Catholic Church. With the missionaries, et cetera, in those days. It was in the early 1700s. And they remained essentially in trust, those lands, until at a certain point, the church just decided to sell them as though it were something that they owned. And the Mohawks were extremely angry. At a certain point, there was it got so bad that there were sort of police on the outside of the reservation, and a whole bunch of Mohawks who were equally well armed on the inside of the reservation. So it was kind of a tense time, but he was one of the people who diffused that, and or let's say worked to diffuse it. Whenever anything bad is about to happen, everybody has to be willing to compromise and get along. But let's say he was one of the leading people to do that. So he's a wonderful person, and he wrote to me one time just before that book. That was Poison Flower,
right.
And he said, I've been reading these Jane Whitefield books for about 20 years and I like them, but, I've been meaning to write to you sometime and just let you know there's a couple of things I don't think you understand. And he proceeded to, I guess it was about a 3-page single space letter, just tell me what those things were. And I thought, oh my God, what a wonderful thing, what a gift that somebody would give you that information. It was just things about modern life and among the Senecas, and it was really helpful. And so it actually inspired me to write that book. I was working on something else and I set it aside, and I don't know if I ever picked it up again. and I wrote Poison Flower, based on a lot of that information. And then when I thanked him for it, he sent me, I think, a 6-page letter, single-spaced, typed, with even more information. And it was all wonderful stuff. And it was things that, I had either misinterpreted or needed to think about more and so on. And he even had things that were good to read, that were, it would be very useful for me to look at. And I did. So it was just great. I didn't send him this book, but I, because I had the idea I had really had more to do with I don't know, let's say things that were closer to my life than to his at that time. But I always use in some of that information, little bits of the information that he gave me years ago. So.
Well, I'm sure that it enriched the series, and we have this whole cultural appropriation thing going on. So I think it's great that he's lent his own authenticity, so to speak, to what you're writing. So in order to make these books work, there has to be a person in peril,
right?
And so you have to create that character, but you also have to create their whole backstory and why it is that they are referred, because it works that way. It's not like Jane advertises or anything, that they are referred to Jane. So what is the scenario in The Left-Handed Twin? What is it that, who is the person that Jane is going to have to focus on?
Her name is Sarah Doughton, and she is a young girl who has come to Los Angeles and is working in basically a Starbucks. That isn't, I don't think I call it a Starbucks, but she's working as a barista and selling coffee. And this sort of intriguing young man keeps coming in day after day, and eventually, and she can tell that he's maneuvering to be sure that she's the one that he talks to and and who waits on him and at the counter. But he always seems to come in at about 11 o'clock in the morning, and he appears a little bit disheveled. That is, as though he's been awake very late and that he has this really interesting life going on. And eventually they go out, and he takes her to a party. And there were actually these parties are something that have been kind of an annoyance in Los Angeles, at least in this part of Los Angeles, because in particular large hillside homes, people will essentially rent out these sort of palatial houses for a party, that people will hold a party there, and it gets very noisy and goes very late, and there's a lot of traffic and a lot of headaches for people. And they became sort of passé during the COVID epidemic, because they kept having those. And suddenly that was an issue, that really you couldn't at that time anyway have 300 people at a house having a loud party with no masks and no distancing and no anything during that period. So the police began to kind of crack down on it, and it hasn't really come back to the extent that I was afraid it would, but it was going on for a long time. But he takes her to a party, and it's one of those. It's a big party with people who have some, let's say, hope of or pretense to celebrity, and they make a lot of noise and have a lot of fun. And she realizes that this man, whose name is Albert, what he does for a living is essentially take advantage of this party life. That is, that he will try to obtain things that are useful for the party, either drugs or some sort of supply like high-end champagne or something. And what happens is that he talks somebody into providing these things as a gift, so that they will be welcome in this exclusive party. But what he's doing really is essentially getting these people to pay his way, and
Right.
to make him welcome, and so on. And he becomes more and more sort of predatory in trying to take advantage of these parties. And she stays. That is, she realizes that even after one of these parties, it's a lot more fun than working and standing on your feet pouring coffee for people. And so she essentially falls in love with him over a period of time, but she's his companion and sort of partner almost. She becomes more and more part of the scam, and eventually she becomes a little bit more popular among all the people that run these parties, because she's this beautiful girl, and she begins to do a little bit of modeling on a kind of informal basis and so on. And eventually she ends up, let's say, being a bit overconfident and ends up cheating on Albert. And Albert's reaction is to pick her up for, theoretically, to go to a party. But what he does is takes her to the place where the man lives that she cheated with, and kills him in front of her. And Sarah testifies against him, but his lawyer is good enough to get her testimony kind of discounted, and he ends up being acquitted. And once he's acquitted, the next person he's going to want to kill is her, because she betrayed him in essentially two ways. So this is the reason why she comes to Jane. And I don't know, Jane provides her with her usual services, And
And the book is off.
the book begins. Yes, things get going.
I thought the whole thing in Los Angeles was really fascinating. I'm astonished by people who are making their careers as quote influencers, or people who are if you want to have a successful party, you need to have some kind of celebrity or a draw, so to speak. But I'm amazed at the income that all these intangibles can seem to create for people. I was reading about, I didn't even know you could do this, professional gamers, and how hazardous this is for their health, because if they get up for a bathroom break, or if they, get up to go and eat or something like that, instead of sitting for hours at their gaming console, then they may lose some of their audience and therefore some of their income. And of course, my question is, who in the world has time to sit there for 5 or 6 hours and watch somebody playing a game? I'm actually more puzzled about the audience than I am about the person who's making a living doing this. And the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal have been exploring the COVID situation for people who quit their jobs, who never got a real job, but what I think of as a real job, and looking into how people have generated income. And I'm just completely fascinated by it. So when I read your book, and I think this guy has worked out, it's a scam, and it gets him into parties, but he also is able to make money off it, right? Actual money off it, and develop quite a good income. And she became a real asset to that.
Right.
So that's one reason he's so pissed off at her, is that she's not only being unfaithful to him in a sexual sense, but she's jeopardizing their income stream.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Well, not necessarily the present income stream, but also the fact that as she gets more popular, that she can become sort of his in to better and better parties, or
right,
more and more exclusive parties. And of course, getting somebody to do a favor or pay him something or whatever in order to get in becomes, you can raise the price. You can raise the price because these are people that you've actually heard of. They're not sort of the faces of tomorrow. You can, go do that.
Yeah, no, I was really blown away by that. And I was wondering, minor celebrities might rent themselves out, so to speak, for parties, but I'm wondering how far up the line you go. Can you actually get Meryl Streep to show up, for it's something like that? Hollywood, I'm not sure that that's a national phenomenon. Do you think that that's really local to Hollywood, which is a celebrity obsessed culture to begin with?
Well, it's a combination of things. One is that, there are these big houses up in the hills where, people have really probably always had kind of giant parties and things going on. But, during the last few years, it really did increase. There were these houses that were built where, the person who had them built or owns them or whatever, virtually never lived in them. They're just, they just rent them out for parties. And, it's an odd way of life. And there have always been people, a lot of people, surrounding the rich. Anybody who's rich and wants to show off and have a great party or whatever has to pay a lot of money to a lot of people for their services, for I don't know, liquor, bartending, security, flowers, whatever, things, anytime you do a huge party. And of course, and music, that all becomes, and there are reasons for each of these people to want to be involved that are not immediate payment. A lot of times, there are musicians who probably charge less than they could just to be heard by the right people, or at least to believe that they're being heard by the right people and stuff. It's just, it's an interesting life.
Well, it is. I've been fascinated. The whole Airbnb phenomenon is really, when did a house become an income asset? I mean, I always think of a house as a place where people live, but what they've actually become, thanks to Airbnb and then this party rental thing that you're talking about, is just a money making machine where you can acquire it and then you generate income from it. And I find that a weird mindset. I am really grateful that we live in a community that does not allow short-term rentals, because there have been some horrendous problems for the neighbors of houses that become either Airbnb rentals and they're not supervised, so they end up being kind of party houses or actual party houses. And I wonder if that's actually, Tom, kind of nudge more people to have HOAs or to live in communities where there's some regulation.
I don't know. It's hard to know, because LA is there is no place like LA. LA is just what, it's the only one. And it's if you want to be involved in any of the industries that are centered here, you sort of have to be nearby, and you have to keep showing up to things, or people will think you're dead. And if you don't show up for every once in a while, you are dead. So you do, I think, have to keep some sort of presence. And it doesn't have to be necessarily a social presence, but there are certain age groups and certain kinds of people are interested in this. And you mentioned Meryl Streep, it would be the opposite of that kind of person. I would say, not only is there no place for her to go up, but she doesn't even live here. So,
well, no, I picked her as a totally unlikely candidate.
Yeah.
What a coup it would be to actually get her. Well, back to Jane. So anyway, this young woman comes to Jane, and she's in fear of her life that the boyfriend, who's been acquitted for murdering the man that this young woman got involved in, unwisely as it all turned out. But maybe she was really looking for an exit from this party life in this guy anyway. It's hard to tell. The stakes go up because the guy, the boyfriend, turns out to be able to bring in some bigger guns. We don't need to go further than that, but the threat escalates dramatically. And Jane's past is the real reason for that, because the new threat, the Russians, figure that if they could just manage to catch Jane, they could extort the location of various people she's helped. And it's basically breaking into witness protection, and securing the identity of somebody who's got a whole new life. And then presumably, I assume you don't want to kill an asset like that because it's a financial asset. Presumably the idea would be to blackmail them, assuming that they have been successful in whatever their new life is.
Well, or turn them over to the people that have been looking for them all this time.
Well, that too, for money. Yeah, because it could be like a bounty hunter, right?
Right. Or somebody who just hates them, and wants them dead. But it's I mean, Jane really obviously has a reason to suspect that something more is going on than looking for this young woman from Los Angeles. They're looking for something bigger and more profitable, and it's her, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, you've really put Jane at risk now. I mean, she was always at risk as she was discovered in the process of disappearing somebody.
Right.
But she's felt fairly secure all this time that she is not going to be exposed, and so here she is all of a sudden at personal risk herself. Now, how does this impact her relationship with her husband?
Problems, but Carrie has at times been, let's say, more adamant about how she should get out of that activity than he is now, because in I forget, it was, I don't know, book 5 or so, he had to ask her to save somebody that he knew. his old mentor, this doctor that had taught him after, when he was a resident. And so he's been a little bit more tolerant of what she's done, or what the reasons are, why it would be necessary for anybody to do that, because he's seen it once, seen it, close up. But also, when you realize that certain things have changed in the relationship, in the first place, he trusts her more. And the second place, he realizes how good she is at it. And at the same time, as I said, he's benefited from it. So, and she does it less often now. That is, when Sarah shows up, she's not expecting anybody to show up, and hasn't had anybody for a couple of years come get in touch with her and need to be saved. So I think he's taken a little bit by surprise this time, because he thought it was over. But the only person who can say it's over is Jane.
Yeah. Well, he'd be really hypocritical if, having used her services himself, he then asked her not to do that. So, you did a good thing, I think, by, giving him a stake in the whole thing. And, now there he is, but he certainly doesn't like it. He worries about her.
Yes.
And of course, because she's actually personally so much more at risk in this book, the stakes are a lot higher for everybody.
Yeah.
But so the landscape of this book is what? Nina touched on it when she popped in for a minute. So instead of being in Los Angeles whenever, you actually end up going northeast.
Right. Well, what she ends up doing is kind of moving Sarah from place to place, because there seems to be this extremely efficient group of people who keep turning up, or somebody that she suspects is involved with them keeps turning up, and she doesn't know yet whether it's something that she doesn't know about Sarah, or whether it's actually her, because she does, sort of realize that at some point somebody's going to come after her again. So she keeps moving from one place in the Northeast to another, and each time it becomes unsafe after a while. Then she realizes that she's got to move her again, and moves on until finally she finds a place that she feels fairly safe in leaving her. But then when Jane takes off to theoretically go home, she realizes that she can't go home, because she's leading these people toward Carrie.
Oh.
And so Jane does something that's kind of extreme, which is a turn that I really like in this book. I feel good about it, is when you're in cities and there's an organized crime group after you. You're the one who's always in danger, and always the underdog, and always running. Once you get in and follow Jane into the wilderness, the odds are very different. They don't know who it is that they're actually following into the woods, and that she will be the one who's got the advantage in a way.
Well, yeah, no, I think it's a wonderful twist, and it's fun to. Maine's a huge state. We always forget that Maine's a border state. That's one of the things that comes up, true of Minnesota and Montana and other places too. But Maine is a gateway to Canada. I've actually been on a trip in Canada where we were allowed to go down to Maine to visit a candy factory right up where Canada and Maine, come together. So it was interesting, to enter Maine as a foreign country, so to speak. That perspective of it was different. But it has a lot of rugged landscape, very rugged landscape. And so it's a wonderful place, for this kind of action to occur. And, I love reading about different landscape. One of the reasons I really like crime fiction is all the places that it takes me, that I might not necessarily go. So have you personally spent time in Maine? I mean, Tom, you're from back in the Buffalo area, aren't you, originally? I mean, you've been in Los Angeles all the time I've known you, but didn't you grow up back in that area?
Yeah, I did. I grew up in a city which is right on the landscape where Jane lives. In fact, she lives pretty much at the end of my parents' street.
Right.
And to the right a little bit. And it was, there's a house that, could have been Jane's. Actually, there are 4 of them in a row. But but yeah, I've been in Maine, but I didn't do what she does, which is she ends up in the on the Appalachian Trail.
Right, which has this terminus in Maine, doesn't it go all the way up to that? I'm trying to remember the name of the mountain.
Yeah, it's Katahdin.
Yeah, Katahdin. So doesn't the Appalachian Trail actually, that's either the terminus or the start, depending on which direction you're going to go, of the Appalachian Trail?
Yes, it is. It's one end of it, and the northern end, of course. And right below that begins this place that they call the 100-mile wilderness, which is it's literally 100 miles of trail where there are no services, no towns, no anything. No, you can't get cell coverage. You can't, as far as I know, you can't do a lot of things that if you get hurt, you're in deep trouble, because there isn't anybody there to help you necessarily, except other hikers. So it is literally what it's called. That is, it's 100 miles of wilderness, as though there were no world outside. So she's, that's where Jane tries to lose these people.
Well, I can tell you, because I lived for part of my life in Eastern Tennessee and Southwest Virginia. Anyway, the Appalachian Trail was not too far away. And there were many tragedies for families who took children and so forth, or even actual just hikers. The rhododendron hills, as they are called, were so incredibly dense that went along the trail, and that part of the trail, that a person could step off the trail into one of those rhododendron hills and become disoriented and lost and completely invisible and not found. Just you wouldn't think that, excuse me, that you could disappear off so completely thoroughly off a fairly well-traveled stretch. But in fact, you could. And there are several children at the time I lived there that, their parents were camping or something, and they would go off on their own and were never seen again, or they were found eventually trapped in one of these hills. So, it is possible that even if you have a trail that a lot of people are moving on, that you can disappear right off the edges of it.
Yeah, it's it's not hard to disappear in the forest. And of course, a lot of it is sort of different from that, and it goes all the way down to Georgia. So you have, have a huge variety of different kinds of terrain and vegetation and so on. But it's an interesting thing that how the trail kind of skirts civilization. Like there's one part of it, one of the entrances to the Appalachian Trail is maybe 300 yards away from the Dartmouth College campus, that you just walk between 2 buildings on Main Street, and here you are. You just sort of take a right turn, and you meet the trail and go wherever you want.
It's interesting that people have a history of wanting to make, and maybe it's a definition or something, definitional thing, of wanting to make journeys along certain pathways. Now you can think about the the trail in Spain, you know, the
Oh, yeah.
Santiago, or you can think about El Camino Real and whatever. But you know, I've often thought that it was sort of a, you know, a way to measure things. You know, you can set yourself a challenge. You know, I'm going to walk the Appalachian Trail, or I'm going to walk this part of it, or I'm going to walk, you know, the Camino in Spain and so forth. And pilgrims' routes, you know, have been established over millennia. So, you know, I really like the way you took the trail and then used it in this particular way in the book. It works really well. So we can't talk about the great ending, and we can't talk about what might be happening to Jane and all that other good stuff. So we probably ought to call Patrick up and see if he has any questions or comments that he might like to make.
Oh,
I
sure.
love Tom because he once said to me that he starts all his book tours with me because until I tell him what his book is about, what to say, he doesn't want to go on tour. So I hope that we provided you with some material here.
Yes, you have. That's good. Well, you not only gave me your thoughts, but you also made me think by asking me those questions. And so, you know,
It's been fun. We've been doing this together for a really long time.
yes. Well,
So Patrick, anything to contribute?
Well, I wanted to ask Tom, did you happen to see Better Call Saul or Breaking Bad, those two shows?
um,
There's a reason.
yeah, well, I watched Breaking Bad for a while and stopped. I haven't watched Better Call Saul.
Well, there's a character that was played by the late, great Robert Forster, who has a role very similar to Jane's, and he helps one of the key characters in the book disappear. And when I saw the character, and it starts with a telephone call, and basically once you make the call and agree to meet on a certain corner, there's no going back, you know, and he plucks you out of your life, and it was just I couldn't help but think of Jane.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. I didn't see that character. I always
If I can think of
yeah.
or if I can find, there's probably a very specific, he was really featured in a couple of key episodes. And if I can find like a YouTube or something, I'll send it to you, Tom. I think you'd really like it.
Well, you know, thank you. I actually I have another source that I may be able to find that from, because my daughter got married last Saturday, and the guy that she married, his father was the line producer on that show. So,
Oh,
you know, he was the guy that made things actually happen and stuff. So, you know, I can probably ask him what that was, or you know.
right. And also, you know, speaking of television, I mean, now that TV is finally caught up, you know, and they're making really interesting programs, you know, I mean, this is the renaissance of TV. Jane would be so perfect if it was done well.
Oh, wow.
What's going on there?
It's optioned, you know, it's been optioned pretty much continuously since 1992. And as each book gets, you know, added, there's more, I guess, to option, but it was re-optioned about, I don't know, a year ago or so. So it's still tied up. But I always have some hope that somebody will come up with an easy, good way to portray Jane. I get nervous about it in a way because I don't want to see it done badly. I hope you know, when you're talking about somebody else's ethnicity and the history of their family, basically, you know, what you're doing is you're writing about their grandmother. You know, and there's a huge responsibility to try to be accurate and try to be respectful and things like that. And you don't know whether other people are going to feel that way. And once you sign over your your product, what what you're writing, your character, and so on. You have no control anymore. Nobody holds a gun to your head and says, sign this contract and take our money. But once you've done it, you really, can't control anything. So,
Jane, you've got multiple books about Jane, so long form television would work for her, but you've written a number of standalones. And The Old Man, that standalone is actually, it's being made into a movie, not long form television. So what's happening there?
it's television. It's
It is television?
right. It's FX Hulu, and there are 10 episodes. And it essentially, they're filming the last 3 now. They were originally set to to do those earlier, but then COVID got in the way. And then the star, Jeff Bridges, was ill during the last year or so. And he is well now, and they're actually filming. So
Well, that's exciting. I don't know why I thought it was a movie rather than episodic television.
well, what happens is that, anything like that that's been around for a while, there are numerous ideas that people propose, and there were times when it was proposed that that would be a movie, and other times, when it would be something else. But this particular attempt is going very well, and it's going to be a TV show. So we'll have to see how that. But they're right now, in the sort of upfront things that they do, the networks do to I don't know, get their sponsors and everybody else interested. They estimated that it would probably air in June. It'll be available on FX Hulu in June, so we'll see.
Well, you come from a long career writing in Hollywood, so how interesting for you that now you've got something that's being turned into this. Have you had a previous, I can't remember, have you had a previous film treatment or TV treatment of any of your books?
Nope. It's one of those things where many have been called, but few were chosen. Everything virtually, gets optioned by, somebody or other for some project, but none of mine have ever made it to the point where anybody actually exposed any film until this one.
That's so odd, because I think particularly some of your standalones have had absolutely made for movie plots. The one where the girl, they're running around in Beverly Hills disguised as dog walkers or whatever it is. I can't, I'm somewhat hazy there, but I love that book. And, I would have thought that would make an absolutely terrific movie.
Well, it's it was optioned for movie, and other things have been too. Sometimes they, what happens is you get sort of a wash of attention and maybe enthusiasm, and then it just sort of goes away because somebody or other wasn't able to solve it or sell it or get the right people interested or something, and then it'll come back. There'll be the next wave will come in.
And once you get one that's made that's successful, it's a lot easier. So, I think if The Old Man does as one hopes it will do, then there's more likely to be attention to some of your other stories. I was thinking about Anne Cleves. She can't write a book now that is not, made for British television.
Yeah.
After Vera and Shetland, and now her new book, her new series in Devon. But they've all been so successful that probably she can't write anything that won't turn into long form television now.
That's right. We should all be so inflicted. It would be good to have.
There's a lot of luck involved, and unfortunately, a lot of it depends on if a personality is attached. Anne herself will tell you that Brenda Blethyn, the Vera woman, is just so amazing that that it works. So not everybody's been fortunate in the casting of their books.
Right. But, I've been as fortunate as I could possibly be with this. So we'll see. It's you know,
And you've lived long enough to see it happen, Tom. We have to think that way at our age, right?
right. That's right. I may not live through reruns, but I'll see.
Love it. Anything else, Patrick?
Nothing specific, but I wanted to ask you, Tom. I mean, so many of your books deal with people that have very specialized skill sets, and there's so much craftsmanship and competence, that normal people don't possess. I don't really have a question, but when you were a kid, were you interested in things like, magic and sleight of hand, and what sort of things appealed to you as a kid?
Well, I don't know. I think the thing that appealed to me most about, when I was a kid was the prospect of not being a kid anymore. Growing up and being, one of the people who sort of decided what he wanted to do when he wanted to do it. But I have always admired people who have some expertise that I don't have, and so I often try to find out what that is, or how do you do that? How does that work? What's that kind of thing? I mean, I think we should remain curious, and I hope I'm as curious as I was when I was a kid, but I don't know. I mean, it's
Well, for instance, I remember I think we talked last time about Joe Gores, and how he had all that knowledge, very specific trade craft knowledge of the burglar's tools, and it was always fun to listen to him.
Yes, it was. It was a terrific thing. It was a privilege to be able to talk to him about a number of different areas. And I also liked the way he did things, like when he did Romani families and other stuff, he would try to include a bit of the language, so that when they, you don't always get just English, you get, also some sense that there's another language behind this, and things like that.
32 Cadillacs. I'm telling you, that was a really fabulous book. I really miss Joe. He was a wonderful writer. But Tom, you are such a wizard plotter, and you are so good at dreaming up, scams and, just amazing stuff. I've always thought that you had a natural bent for, you were a natural criminal, but you're also a really upright, moral person. So maybe you channeled what could have been a great career as a criminal into being a wonderful writer.
I don't know. Maybe I was just too lazy to do any of it. I just wrote it down. But
you really are a master of intricate plotting. I mean, some of your plots, it has to work like clockwork in order to make it happen. And you've brought in, evil Russians. You've got, you've created some astonishing villains.
Well, thank you. I just, I feel great that people have appreciated things that you put in. When you do this, you're sort of exposing yourself to criticism or hatred or anything, just boredom, sheer boredom. And it feels great when people like it. And
well, oftentimes you have people, Patrick's right, that you've got a lot of people that have amazing skill sets, but you're often good at taking, a sort of ordinary person and thrusting them into a situation where, your insurance scam book, it still remains one of my all-time favorites. But you put people into situations and then see how they cope. And some of them are kind of ordinary people that wind up doing criminal things, and some of them are trying not to do criminal things. So I'm always surprised by your books. I mean, every book you write is a surprise.
Well, thank you. That's really that's a great compliment. It's something that I try to surprise people. I do try to feel as though, okay, you may like this, you may not like this, but you haven't read it before. You haven't seen it in a movie, you haven't watched it on television, and that that's also how I judge other people's books sometimes, you know. Is this just a rehash of something that I read 20 years ago?
Yeah.
And, you know, if I've avoided that sin, I feel, I feel good.
Well, you should. I mean, you know, you've had a marvelous career and you certainly deserved all the accolades and awards and so forth that you won. But I'm really pleased for you, since you live in Hollywood, I'm really pleased for you that you are getting a TV adaptation, because I think it must be hard to live in Los Angeles and not do that.
Well, I don't know. We worked in it. It was a fun, you know, Joe and I were my wife. Not everybody knows who Joe is. Joe is my wife, and we met working in universities and got married. And then at a certain point, somebody asked me if I wanted to write television. And so I said, you know, I don't know how to do that. So, you know, you sort of called the wrong guy. And this person said, well, you know, I'm interested in seeing if you would like to write television. If you don't like it, you know, you can just go back to working in universities where you are, you know. And so I went down the hall to my wife's office and asked her what she thought. And she said, yeah, why don't you do it? Why don't you give it a try? You're bored with what you're doing right now. And if you get, you know, get stuck, I'll help you. And, you know, that was not an empty offer, because, you know, she at least had seen scripts and things of that sort. She was brought up here, and her father was a comedy writer. And so that was sort of, we ended up doing that for 11 years. So it was fun for us. But at the point where we left and stopped doing it, I sort of didn't care whether I ever did it again. You know, we had done enough, and it was sort of fun, and we loved the people and the experience and so on. But I don't know that I would have been happy if I had a 40-year career in that field, because, you know, as you get older, it's not really your generation that you're trying to speak to anymore. So I think you become more and more out of it in a way, you know, so, which is not necessarily true for some reason in writing fiction. I guess because you have more time to figure out what it is and examine, you know, the questions that you want to look into, and examine the, I don't know, the place where it takes place and so on. But I think, you know, I would be a little too slow on the uptake probably for modern television.
Well, I'm gonna quote Star Trek: "Live long and prosper."
Yeah.
You know, it's good to have that, you know, that deal. I've always been a belief. I made lots of mistakes in my life, you know, but you know, I've survived to have a happy ending, and I really think that, you know, a happy ending. I agree with Robert Dugoni in his recent book when he said that, you know, having a long life is a privilege. It's not a right. You
Yeah.
know, living long, and for those of us who are doing that, I think that we have to regard it as a privilege. And you know, you've done a wonderful job with it. I'm going to keep trucking for a while longer. We'll see where we are. So I think on that note, probably before we get totally maudlin, we should call this off. It's been a wonderful time to talk to you. Patrick, thanks as always for your tech support.
Yep.
We do have autographed copies of The Left-Handed Twin in stock at the Poison Pen. And you don't actually have to have read an earlier Jane Whitefield to read this book. It stands completely alone. Make I think, a fabulous gift. So if you're thinking about, you know, what to buy people, great thing about books is they don't spoil. You can, you know, nobody can have too many books because nothing bad happens to them while they're sitting on the shelf, except that you wish you were reading one. Anyway, Tom, love to Joe, and we'll look forward to seeing you in March when you and Joe come here for the Brandeis annual author lunch, which will be live again this year. So that's terrific news. So happy holidays to you. And good night, Patrick. We spent most of the day together, so
Yes, we have.
probably like to go home. Have some other
Good night,
company.
Tom.